would kind of agree with your point that Donald Trump opposing the war in Iraq on that stage in South Carolina and telling Jeb Bush his brother lied us into Iraq was an amazing moment. That his rhetoric about America first is substantially preferable to neocon rhetoric about spreading democracy. But the issue is you kind of have these 4 years where he clearly got rolled by his deep state at almost every single turn. And then, as Clint mentioned, just the other day, he's bragging about how the aid to Ukraine is a loan, not a gift, and how he influenced that. By the way, it's a loan with 0% interest and no enforcement mechanism of them paying it back. So it's very different from a gift. And so it just seems to me like he's giving us these indications that while he might say the right thing, has he learned anything? Like, and also just some of the people being floated around. You know, I've heard rumors of Marco Rubio being considered for VP. I mean, the guy, we're not big fans of Rubio here. The guy, now I've heard rumors about great people, including yourself as well, but like, the question is like, has he learned is there any indication that he's actually learned how to maneuver once in power?
So let me say, I'll give you my word on this, and then I think we got smart minds here next to me up here. Let's talk about vision and actually where we want to go, rather than personality. Because how much further are we going to go, right? You can talk about personalities and individual people. That's less valuable than actual vision of where we're headed. But you asked a question, I'm going to answer it. So here's my view. I ran for president for the first time this time around, and I learned a lot of things that I did not know before I entered this game, okay? There are a million things I would do differently in my own campaign. Not ideological policy things, a few things maybe, but the operations of it, just running in the sport of politics, a million things you learn, such that if I were advising somebody to do it again, or if I was, God forbid, ever doing it again, you were going to understand what you didn't know the first time around. I know for a fact Donald Trump would say the same thing about the fact of coming in from the outside, not knowing the first thing about politics, coming in from the world of business, but I think that's an advantage. And then saying, you know what, am I going to run for a second term if I already did everything perfectly the first time? There'd be no reason to run for a second term. And so it's my view that we have an opportunity to shape, for the better, the future direction of the America First movement. Do we want to seize it or not? I believe we do. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing every bit of what I am doing. That's why we have now an official opposition in the Republican Party platform from the top down to the opposition of a central bank digital currency to backdoor censorship from tech companies in ways that we did not several years ago. And I think that this is the direction of the future. Take that positive national pride strand of the America First movement, combine it with the libertarian core of the Constitution, the libertarian bones on which the Constitution was written, with 3 branches of government, not 4, and a Bill of Rights that has, say what you will about it, the best and greatest guarantor of actually protecting individual rights of any other nation in human history. Combine those 2 things, that's our future ahead, and that's why I'm here. And you know what? Is anybody perfect? We're going to say this. Am I perfect? Is anybody in this room perfect? Is anybody God? Raise your hand if you're God. I'm not. Okay, just Dave Smith. A couple of them back there, too, so you're going to have to duke it out.
He'll be here
but
on
for
Sunday.
the rest
His
of
name's
you,
Ron Paul.
For the rest of you, none of us is God, but the beauty of this country is that we're not perfect, but we aspire to perfection.
Yeah.
And the left makes this mistake. They do the same thing. Well, Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. Therefore, the nation was started in 1619 and we abandoned the Constitution because it was written by slaveholders. No. We are fallen human beings. But I would rather live in a country that has ideals and has people who fall short of them than to live in a country that doesn't have any ideals at all. And you know what? That's what the United States has found out, is the pursuit of perfection. So don't turn your back on that. Help us pursue perfection and the vision that we set into motion. That's my ask for you. And I would say let's go back to talking about policies and ideas.
Sure thing. Absolutely. Okay. So in terms of policies, I think that here's one area where we might differ a bit. One of the things you ran on was kind of a crackdown of trade relations with China.
I would say crackdown of our economic dependence for vital attributes of our life from China. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Clint, what do you think about the idea of that?
Well, I'll just ask a follow-up before I jump through this TV screen. How do you decide how do you approach this from a libertarian free market perspective, but also have the president who's running on, I'm going to dictate what materials, what supplies are vital to this nation, and therefore sanction or tariff or whatever to diminish the supply coming out of China? I don't understand.
Yeah, so beautiful question, okay? This is a question of, I'll give you an analogy from the Trojan War, okay? So Greece would have never defeated Troy by tearing down the walls of Troy. The walls of Troy were too hard to scale. So they gave a gift that they knew that Troy could not resist, the gift of the Trojan horse, which they then used as the vehicle to burn it down from within. And I think in many ways, China has done this by viewing capitalism, not real capitalism, but a perverted form of it, as the Trojan horse that they've used to actually burn us down from within. I'll explain what I mean. Is it capitalism if one end of that party, so let's say China says that the United States, or let's use the word of BlackRock. I'll give a real world example. BlackRock manages U.S. government dollars from California's pension fund and New York's pension fund that require them, the government actors require them, as a condition of managing their money, to say that companies like Exxon and Chevron cannot actually maximally burn fossil fuels in the United States. They have to adopt Scope 3 emissions caps. Yet that same company, exact same company, as a condition for entering business in China, had to lobby for lower listing standards for Chinese companies in the United States, and is actually one of the largest shareholders of PetroChina, to whom they don't apply those same Scope 3 emissions caps. I'm sorry, that's not capitalism. That is a crony capitalism in reverse.
That's true.
That is state-directed capitalism. That is mercantilism. So we cannot delude ourselves into just reciting the same slogans, by the way, as that neocon wing of the Republican Party did 40 years ago. We're not going to just recite those mantras, because that game isn't capitalism. It is us pretending like we're indulging in international capitalism when we're actually trading with a mercantilist actor.
Yeah.
So against that backdrop, my view is, can we depend on that same country for our own defense industrial base? That doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe some of you think we don't need a defense industrial base, and that could be a coherent view, and you're allowed to have that view. But for those of you who actually agree that there's some minimal defense industrial base that the U.S. requires, it is completely incoherent for the U.S. to depend on that counterparty for providing the very defense industrial base that's supposedly defending against their threat. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's my position, which I think takes into account the reality of what we're actually facing in this unique circumstance, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater and say we somehow give up on free trade in the first place, and we give up on trade as a way to actually reflect Adam Smith's vision for the people who are actually playing by the same rules of capitalism.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the clarification. It does answer a lot, but I view all trade wars, mercantilism, I view all of it as Band-Aids on bullet wounds. I really do. I see it as ultimately the reason that our industrial base has been outsourced to China is because we closed the gold window.
Well, a lot of regulations here.
Well, I mean, it's really a large product of 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, and then closing the gold window in 71. You look at the industrial base; it's just it evaporates over those following 50 years. I don't think that's a coincidence. Now,
We're still producing a lot of paper money.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, but that's really what we're dealing with right now. Is that while we import a lot of actual goods that are being produced by China, and we ought to be appreciative because we couldn't afford to buy them if they were being made in America. What our main export is paper, green paper. That's what we export. That is not a foundation that's sustainable either. And I think that tariffs or any sort of, these are all just like pinpoint targets on what is ultimately a wound that is fatal. Yeah. And we have to end the Federal Reserve if we're going to resolve that.
So, I'll say two things.
Of course, go ahead.
When's Ron Paul coming?
Ron Paul will be here Sunday night.
Sunday night, all right. So I'll say two things in response to this. First is, we're not going to, here's a good deep agreement. We're not going to beat China by being at China. Okay, that much I definitely agree with. Look at the central bank digital currency. The main argument for it in the United States is that China's doing it. why is China doing it? They're doing it because they want to be able to wipe your bank account clean if you say something that the government doesn't agree with. So keeping up with the Joneses or the Jinpings is not an answer for why we do something here in the United States. So there we deeply agree. You know what country banned TikTok before the United States did? China, actually. So we're not going to beat China by being China. The point of monetary policy, you're not going to find daylight between us. I think that our dollar should be pegged to commodities that actually have real value, that purposefully tie the hands of the federal government. Now, that's a hard answer. But China I think that is a necessary but not sufficient answer to the question.
Okay.
Because I think China has understood that the gain from trade model only works if you have a commercial actor on the other side. But if somebody else is guided by non-commercial goals, engaging in a system that was designed for actual engaging in mutual commerce, they're able to advance political goals through a vector that was exclusively designed for trade. And I think that's the trap we've fallen into. And you know what I want to avoid? I don't want, you're going to talk foreign wars on one side of the world, I don't want a foreign war on this side of the world either. But in order to wake up to that reality, we got to say that if you're not playing by the same set of rules, open up our trade relationships with Japan and South Korea and India and other countries where we've restricted it. If you actually want to declare economic independence from China, producing in the United States is good, but you got to be open to every other mechanism to do it too. So I think that's where we might find some common ground.
Okay. Very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit, because the broad topic of this was about the deep state, but we were covering a lot of things. But I will say that here's an area where I do think there's some daylight between the two of you. I hear you talk a lot about the FBI and the CIA, the NSA. Another three-letter organization is, which is just as bad, is the DEA. And I know you've kind of taken like a very aggressive posture toward drug cartels in Mexico, even at one point talking about a drone campaign against them. Why don't you just support calling off the stupid, disastrous war on drugs and just get this stuff out of the black market?
So I'll say a word on this here. You guys are going. I'm in the Libertarian Party convention here as the guy who's defending some level of drug regulation in the United States.
This audience is very high.
Right.
Yes.
I didn't get that sense. Yeah. So here's what I will say is, I favor medical choice. So let's start with common ground, and then I'll go with where we differ. Decriminalize. There's one GOP candidate who favors decriminalizing ayahuasca, ketamine, psilocybin for people who want to use it to treat PTSD, certainly veterans who are suffering from PTSD. That doesn't exist today. And so I understand the arguments for medical choice, and I'm fully in favor of it. I mean, I've dealt with the FDA. My first business was in biotech, and I've dealt with the same FDA. Don't forget, medical choice means two things. One is we've, of course, been taught the hard way in recent years. Just because the FDA has approved something doesn't mean that you should ever be mandated to take it. So that one. But just because the FDA has not approved something does not mean that you shouldn't be able to take it. In fact, you deserve to have medical choice, and I stand for the absolute, actual right to try. And so part of what we're seeing here is this is actually administrative blackballing, where we do have a right to try law. Actually, you got to think about things that Donald Trump passed. The right to try law was actually passed under Donald Trump's tenure. He pushed for it, but the FDA blackballed it. Here's a dirty little secret in the pharmaceutical industry. If you're a company that avails yourself of right to try, so you say that, okay, I'm going to make my therapy available for people who want to try it, even if the FDA hasn't approved it. Even though the law permits you to do that, the FDA will completely penalize you and blackball you on any other application you bring before them, so that's why no company actually does it. So I'm focused on tackling what I think is the next frontier of actually dealing with stupid drug regulation in this country, which is ensuring medical choice for medical purpose. And I think let's cross that bridge first, is where I'm at before we have a further discussion. On the issue of fentanyl, which is where I was the most hawkish, okay? I don't think it is a drug overdose if somebody takes something that they don't know contains a substance and then die from it. I have met parents across this country, this is not a joking matter or anything else, okay, legalize what exactly, right? So but I'm talking about where I was most hawkish is on fentanyl. Well, if somebody's taking a pill that they might have purchased illegally, but the kid takes it and they die not knowing it contained fentanyl. That's not something they signed up for. That's not a fair bargain.
100%.
And that's happening intentionally as well.
But I think
so. My focus is on addressing that crisis. And do we agree on this issue? Of course not. But am I going to be probably the Republican who's going to be most likely to bring the other half of medical choice to bear? I believe that is as far as we're going to get as the next step.
It's fair enough. I think the point that people are making as they kind of heckle here is that the whole point is that you're 100% right. It's that person was poisoned. They didn't OD on drugs. The point is that you will exclusively find this in the black market. You're not going to hospitals like there's not an issue of people going to hospitals and getting a pain pill and ODing from fentanyl because it's tested and it's all weighed out.
So this is just an area where we're going to, so we agree on 98% of policies. There's going to be, you've got a part of the 2% window where when we look at what part of medical choice do we agree on, if you deserve to take a substance for medical purposes that has not been approved by the FDA, you can't do it today, and I believe you should have the opportunity to do it, from ayahuasca to ketamine to psilocybin. I agree with you.
All right.
Do I think it's going to be net good at this juncture, especially when you're dealing with, and this is where it actually, the rubber hits the road for me is, I'm a libertarian for adults. Kids aren't the same as adults.
Agreed.
Okay? And so that's, I think, where I also draw a big line of impact, and that informs a lot of the views and the stances I've adopted.
Okay, well, I 100% do agree with that. Kids, if my kids are listening, you have zero rights. All right. Guys, I've been given the sign that I got to wrap up. I really enjoyed this so much. Thank you, Clint Russell, Vivek Ramaswamy. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, give it up for Vivek. He didn't have to do this.
Hey, I just want to say thank you guys for welcoming me. Thank you guys for keeping an open mind. You've had an impact on me. Give a round of applause to Clint and a great moderator, Dave Smith, as well. Thank you guys. Appreciate the warm welcome.
More coverage from the Libertarian National Convention later today when 2024 presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump will speak to delegates. Watch that live at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.
This Memorial Day weekend on C-SPAN's Q&A, retired U.S. Senate historian Betty Coed shares stories from her book, Scenes, People, Places, and Events That Shaped the United States Senate, a collection of brief chronicles of Senate history that she presented to senators during their Tuesday caucus lunches between 2009 and 2023. Some of the stories told include the influence and power of Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson, the story of the first female senator, and when Mark Twain worked as a Senate staffer.
He was not yet a famous author. He was a promising rising author at the time, and he was working on his first book, and he was looking for a job that would help pay the bills to essentially promote his writing career. Stewart, despite his sinister appearance, did give him a job, and he became a clerk in Stewart's office. At that time, that was not unusual because the Senate only met a few months out of the year, and so they often hired reporters and correspondents as clerks for those. It was sort of a mutual beneficial experience for both of them. And but he didn't prove to be a particularly good Senate employee.
Betty Coed with her book, Scenes, Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can listen to Q&A and all of our podcasts on our free C-SPAN Now app. C-SPAN is your unfiltered view of government. We're funded by these television companies and more, including Midco, Midco supports C-SPAN as a public service, along with these other television providers, giving you a front row seat to democracy.
An update now involving the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor is seeking arrest warrants against the leaders of Israel and Hamas on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Today, I'm filing applications for warrants of arrest before Chamber 1 of the International Criminal Court in the situation in the State of Palestine. These applications are the outcome of independent investigations conducted by my office under the direction of the two principal trial lawyers standing behind me today, Brenda J. Hollis, who, in addition to leading our work in the situation in Ukraine for the past couple of years, has since January also taken over leadership of the Palestine investigation, and Andrew Cayley, King's Counsel, who more recently joined the office and will be leading our work on the situation in the State of Palestine going forward. On the basis of evidence collected and examined and analysed by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that three senior leaders of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine from at least the 7th of October 2023. Extermination as a crime against humanity. Murder as a crime against humanity and as a war crime. The taking of hostages as a war crime. Rape and other acts of sexual violence during captivity as crimes against humanity and as war crimes. Torture during captivity as a crime against humanity and as a war crime. Other inhumane acts during captivity as a crime against humanity. Cruel treatment during captivity as a war crime. And outrages upon personal dignity during captivity as a war crime. These crimes were committed in the context of the ongoing armed conflict detailed in the applications and as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Israel by Hamas and other armed groups. My office submits that there are reasonable grounds to believe that these three Hamas leaders are criminally responsible for the killing of Israeli civilians in attacks perpetrated by Hamas and other armed groups on the 7th of October 2023, the taking of hostages, and the other crimes alleged in our applications. My office has diligently collected evidence and interviewed survivors and eyewitnesses at the scene of at least 6 major attack locations. The applications rely upon evidence such as CCTV footage, authenticated audio, photographs and video material, expert evidence, and statements by Hamas and the members of other armed groups, including by the alleged perpetrators themselves. Sinwar, Daif, and Haniyeh not only planned and instigated the crimes committed on the 7th of October 2023 in our submission, they also acknowledged their responsibility through their own words and by their actions. They are charged both as co-perpetrators and as superiors. My office also submits today that there are reasonable grounds to believe that hostages taken from Israel, taken from their homes, taken from their communities, have been kept in inhumane conditions, and that some have been subjected to horrendous sexual violence, including rape, while being held in captivity. We have reached that conclusion based upon medical records, contemporaneous video and documentary evidence, and interviews with survivors. We are continuing our investigations into crimes committed on the 7th of October, including investigating further reports of sexual violence. And I repeat and underline my call for the immediate release of all hostages taken from Israel and for their immediate safe return to their families. This is a fundamental imperative, demanded by good conscience, demanded by morality, and demanded by international humanitarian law. Hostages must be released immediately. I can also confirm today that I have reasonable grounds to believe, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of the State of Palestine from at least the 8th of October 2023. The crimes include starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health or cruel treatment, willful killing or murder, and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, as well as crimes against humanity of extermination and or murder, persecution, and allegations of crimes of committing other inhumane acts. It's alleged that these crimes were committed in the context of the ongoing armed conflict and as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population of Gaza, pursuant to a state policy. Unfortunately, these crimes continue to this day. My office submits that these individuals, through a common plan, have systematically deprived the civilian population of Gaza of objects indispensable to human survival. We have reached that conclusion based upon interviews with survivors, many eyewitnesses, experts, from satellite imagery, statements from Israeli officials, including the 2 individuals subject to the present application, as well as based upon several hundred authenticated videos, photographs, and audio recordings, many of which were taken and shared by victims and eyewitnesses themselves. This systematic deprivation resulted from a decision to impose a total siege on Gaza by completely closing the 3 border crossing points, Rafah, Kerem Shalom, and Erez, for extended periods of time, and by arbitrarily restricting the transportation of essential supplies, including food and medicine, through the border crossings after they were reopened. The siege, the total siege, also involved cutting off cross-border water pipelines from Israel to Gaza, which is the principal source of clean water for the population in Gaza. It was cut off for prolonged periods beginning on the 9th of October 2023, and it was accompanied by the cutting off or hindering of electricity supplies to Gaza from the 8th of October 2023 until today. That conduct took place alongside attacks that killed civilians, including people queuing for food, the obstruction of aid delivery by humanitarian organizations, and attacks on aid workers that forced many of those same humanitarian organizations to either cease operations or limit their life-saving efforts in Gaza. The tragic effect of the use of starvation as a method of warfare against Gaza's civilian population is acute, it's visible, and it's widely known, and it's confirmed by multiple witnesses and victims, including local and foreign medical doctors. That starvation has caused and continues to cause deaths, malnutrition, dehydration, and profound suffering among the population. Famine is already present in some areas of Gaza, and it is imminent in others. My office charges Netanyahu and Gallant as co-perpetrators and as superiors in the commission of these alleged crimes. Israel, like all states, has the right to defend its population. It has every right to ensure the return of hostages that have been criminally and callously taken. Those rights, however, do not absolve Israel of its obligations to comply with international humanitarian law. Intentionally causing death, starvation, injury, and suffering to the civilian population, including so very many women and children, are criminal means to achieve military and political goals. That's what we allege. As I have repeatedly underlined, since last year in Egypt, in Israel, and in Palestine, and again this year, those who do not comply with the law should not complain later when my office takes action based upon solid evidence. That day has come. Today we underline in the clearest possible fashion that international law and the laws of armed conflict apply to everyone. No foot soldier, no commander, no civilian leader, no one can act with impunity. Nothing on earth can justify willfully depriving human beings, including women and children, babies, the old and the young, of the basic necessities required for life. Nothing on earth can justify hostage taking or the targeting and killing of civilians. The independent judges of this International Criminal Court are the sole arbiters as to whether the necessary standard for the issuance of warrants of arrest have been met. The judges of the International Criminal Court must be now given the space to do their work and dispassionately and objectively review the evidence that we have submitted. Should the learned judges approve my applications and issue the requested warrants, I will work closely with the registrar of the court to apprehend the named individuals. I call upon and count on all states, especially state parties to the Rome Statute, to approach this application and the subsequent judicial decision that will be rendered with the same seriousness they have shown in other situations. I also stand ready to work with non-state parties in our common pursuit of justice and accountability. It is critical in this moment that my office and all parts of the court continue to conduct our work with full independence and impartiality. And I insist that all attempts to impede, to intimidate, or to improperly influence the officials of this court cease immediately. My office will not hesitate to act pursuant to the provisions of Article 70 of the Rome Statute if such conduct continues and persists. We will also submit further applications for warrants of arrest if and when we determine, after independent and objective analysis, that the threshold of realistic prospect of conviction has been met. My office is advancing multiple and interconnected additional lines of inquiry, including concerning reports of sexual violence during the 7th of October attacks in Israel and in relation to the large-scale bombing that has caused and continues to cause so many civilian deaths and injuries and so much suffering in Gaza. I renew my call for all parties to the current conflict to comply with these basic principles of law without any further delay. I also wish to emphasize that the principle of complementarity at the heart of the Rome Statute will continue to be assessed by my office as we take action in relation to the alleged crimes and alleged perpetrators, and as we move forward with other lines of inquiry. But complementarity requires us to defer to national authorities only when they sincerely engage in independent and impartial judicial processes that do not shield suspects from accountability and which are not a sham. It requires thorough investigations at all levels addressing the policies and actions underlying these applications. Today, I wish to underline one message very clearly. It's my strong conviction that if we do not demonstrate our willingness to apply the law equally, if it is seen as being applied selectively, we will be creating the conditions for its complete collapse. And in doing so, we would be loosening the remaining bonds that hold us together, the stabilizing connections between all communities, all individuals, the safety net to which all victims look to in times of suffering. This is the true risk we face at this perilous moment. Now more than ever, we must collectively demonstrate that international humanitarian law, the foundational baseline for human conduct during conflict, applies to all individuals and applies equally across situations addressed by my office and by the court. This is how we will prove, tangibly, in real terms, for all victims, that the lives of all human beings, wherever they may be, have equal value.
Next, President Biden reacting to the International Criminal Court seeking arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The president also comments on the ICC's allegations that Israel's actions are genocide. The president's remarks came during an event celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month at the White House.
Distinguished guests, the President of the United States, accompanied by the Vice President of the United States and Mr. Emhoff.
That song, Dan. Good evening. It is my honor to be standing here with President Biden and Vice President Harris. They have both stood strong with the Jewish community time and time again. There is no one fighting harder to combat hate and to unite our country. To all of our esteemed guests, it is so great to join you for a Jewish American Heritage Month celebration at the White House. Tonight, we've come together to celebrate our heritage and honor our culture, to reflect on the invaluable contributions of our ancestors and the Jewish leaders of today. But it is also a challenging time for our community. It's been a dark and difficult 7 months. I know a lot of us are feeling alone, afraid, and in pain. There is an epidemic of hate, including a crisis of anti-Semitism in our country and around the world. We see it on our streets, our college campuses, and our places of worship. I know it's difficult to have hope and to feel optimistic right now. And to be honest, some days it's really challenging for me to put myself out here and do this work publicly. And I know it's hard for you too. But we keep fighting because we have no choice but to fight. Jewish leaders are on the front